In early November 2025, I took a trip to Montreal, Canada's micromobility darling, but I was unpleasantly surprised by the experience. Instead of a micromobile city, I was practically forced to use anything but transit, but it wasn't due to a lack of infrastructure, it was solely due to a man-made transit outage. A lot of us North Americans have heard wonderful things about Montreal's public transit and bike lane networks. They are, in fact, some of the best in North America, although that is a low bar. However, during my recent trip to the land of moose, mounties, and maple syrup, I had plans to highlight what Montreal is doing right and how other North American cities could emulate them. But unbeknownst to me, Montreal's transit maintenance workers scheduled a strike for the month of November 2025. But they also scheduled this strike in the most Canadian way possible. At least for this initial month of November, they're still offering rush hour service and late evening service. Canada, I could only aspire to be this damn nice, especially during a strike for my own rights as labor. But as a tourist, these strikes definitely affected my ability to traverse the city, so I can only imagine how disruptive these strikes have been for residents. Yes, I said strikes. This is actually the third time maintenance workers have striked this year, and as of the recording of this video, metro operators and bus drivers are planning to go on their own full strike on November 15th and 16th. Now, I'm no expert on Canadian geopolitics, but usually when workers claim conditions are so poor that they have to band together and stop working, forfeiting their pay and risking their jobs, I tend to believe them. So, what is the transit union actually even fighting for, and why won't Montreal's transit agency, the STM, give in to their demands? I'm going to simplify this a bit, but the transit workers essentially want three things. First, they want the STM to stop outsourcing repair work. The union argues this is putting job security at risk, leading to additional layoffs. The STM argues outsourcing is cheaper, but the union has provided stats to refute that claim. Second, the union wants to reduce mandatory overtime, which they say had some workers on the clock for more than 12 hours at a time or working 10 days in a row. They claim this has been a direct consequence of the layoffs. The union and the STM have made concessions on this demand, however. Third, the union wants a pay increase. The STM has offered to raise their pay at the same rate of the nearby Quebec City, but the union argues these wage increases are not enough due to the higher cost of living in Montreal, especially housing. However, early this year, politicians in Quebec passed a law limiting transit workers' ability to strike. This law comes into effect at the end of November, and the union believes the STM is now negotiating in bad faith, essentially taking a knee, waiting for the clock to run out. But before I get more into that, I want to share how, as a transit user, these strikes affected me and how they're affecting the citizens of Montreal. First, how are these strikes affecting the wallets of Montrealers? Well, I don't think it takes a genius to tell you that a transit strike is bad for business. Well, unless your business is named Uber, Lyft, or Bixi, Montreal's bike share. When people are severely restricted on what time they can travel, less trips are bound to happen. Mandatory trips like going to work will happen for most people, especially for those who can't work from home, but optional trips like getting dinner with friends or going out to the game are likely to be postponed or canceled altogether. Additionally, as I mentioned, people will likely be forced to take more rideshare trips, which is usually much more expensive than public transit. Although annoying, it may not be a big issue for those who can afford it if you don't factor in the additional environmental costs, but for those who can't afford it, they'll probably either stay home or reallocate budget from other discretionary spending, both likely resulting in less money being spent in the local economy. So, transit strikes are bad for your wallet, no surprise, but what about your health? Well, those with cars are likely to spend less time walking and more time waiting in traffic, looking for parking, and nearly hitting pedestrians. Those without cars may be able to walk, bike, or take rideshare, but each of those options have their downsides. Walking severely limits the distance you can travel in a set amount of time, meaning you're less likely to interact with people and businesses outside of your comfortable walking radius. Biking is a great alternative to transit, and Montreal does have a decent biking network, at least in some neighborhoods. But Montreal's bike share, Bixi, is ridiculously cheap compared to New York City. A single ride is about $1, whereas a single ride in New York is $5. Insanely enough, a monthly pass for Bixi is only about $16, whereas a day pass for City Bike is $25. I really need to do another video bashing City Bike. There's just so much wrong with that system. And honestly, I should do a public spanking every single year until they fix it. But that's enough on that topic. You'll have to subscribe to catch that video when it comes out. However, biking in general is not the most accessible form of transit for those with disabilities and the elderly. And of course, there's rideshare, which offers the same negatives as driving, only this time you get to pay exponentially more per mile. Now, I strongly considered using Bixby as my main form of transportation, but as a tourist unfamiliar with Montreal's bike network, which I noted was fantastic in some places but seriously lacking in others, I didn't feel quite comfortable blindly trusting Google Maps to take me on a path that wouldn't kill me. In addition, Montreal is very hilly, and I wasn't looking to participate in a high-intensity workout on the way to dinner or to the grocery store. Unfortunately, Bixby, like a few other bike share operators, including Boston's Blue Bikes, closed many stations during the winter months, a practice which I think makes no sense. Just because it gets cold doesn't mean I stop being the go places. You could say ridership is down, but of course ridership will fall when you stop offering people places to go. How about you offer a winter discount, incentivizing more people to use the system instead of just shutting everything down? Although I did not rent a Bixby bike, I did at one point use the bike lane, not to cycle, but to rollerblade. Honestly, it was very similar to the New York experience. Some bike paths were nice and protected, while others were just a set of cones along a high-speed road that sure had a speed limit, but if you had to guess, does this road give 20-mile-an-hour speed limit or 40-mile-an-hour speed limit? In my opinion, it's the latter, and based on their driving speeds, I believe most drivers would agree with me. In addition, in some places the bike paths were in terrible shape. Now, if it was early spring and the path conditions were due to a harsh Canadian winter, I could understand. But it's early November. There is no reason for a bike path to look like this. To be honest, you probably need a mountain bike to comfortably traverse some of these areas. And that was if you didn't get hit by a truck on this extremely sketchy section of the bike path. Now, I know it sounds like I'm being really harsh on Montreal, but this is still so much better than most North American cities. Of course, that doesn't mean there isn't still room for improvement, but urbanizing a city is a decades-long process, and Montreal seems to be on the right path. Off topic, but this might be the first micromobile video where I actually talk about both methods of transportation featured in my logo. Better late than never. I mean, that's actually the same mentality I need to have with New York City's subway system. And honestly, the reason why I should have that mentality is because trains are awesome. And I'm so lucky to live in a North American city with public transit so efficient, a car is an accessory, not a necessity. On this trip to Montreal, I went with two friends who do not live in New York City and have to use a car almost every day, whether it's to get to work, do errands, or just see friends. At the end of this trip, despite all the transit hiccups we encountered, they expressed how nice it was to not have to start with the car even once. And it makes sense. Driving, especially in a city, kinda sucks. Even though we did a lot of walking and it got as low as 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the only times I was physically uncomfortable during transportation was when three of us, two of us being taller than 6 feet, had to squeeze in the back of an Uber when we wanted to get somewhere further than a 30-minute walk when transit wasn't running. A city like Montreal doesn't realize how essential public transit is until it's no longer running. And once the government of Quebec actually realized their true worth, they stripped them of their ability to fight for their rights. If transit workers are so essential, shouldn't they be paid as such? It's really interesting how quick governments are to limit what workers can demand, but seem to have little interest in limiting how much owners can take. If it's not clear, I think stripping people of the ability to strike is inherently undemocratic. Strikes are supposed to make people uncomfortable. That's why they're effective. It's the workers' only way to stand up to power, and people like those in the Quebec government know that. In my opinion, it's no coincidence that negotiations between the transit union and STM have stalled, as the STM no longer has an incentive to reach a fair deal. What I do know is this: public transit is pivotal to cities, transit workers are essential, and given their importance in the functioning of our cities, they should be treated with the utmost respect by transit riders and executives. I'm Joël, you're watching Micromobile. I will see you very soon. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Goodbye. Hold up, update. We have a transit update. The strike is over, technically. I just want to give a quick update. I wrote this video on the way back from my trip to Montreal, and in the time since, the strike has ended. Kind of. Well, the strike is officially over, but as far as I know, a deal hasn't been reached yet between the STM and the union. They decided to end the strike early because legislators were threatening to move up the start date of this bill to end their ability to strike in the first place. Now, when that happened, as I mentioned before, there was still another strike scheduled to happen on the 15th and the 16th of November, but that was the drivers union, not the maintenance union. That strike was canceled at the last moment, as it seems the drivers and the STM have reached a deal. But as soon as that strike was resolved, the administration of the STM decided to go on their own strike. 3 strikes by 3 different unions, all in the same 10-day period. Now, as I record this update, I think that strike is currently still ongoing, but it looks like trains in Montreal are running. To be honest, I'd really like to know your guys' opinion on this. Should essential workers be able to strike? And if they can't strike, how should they defend their rights as workers? I do think this is one of the most important moral issues in labor, because if you're essential, people, especially those with disabilities, they rely on you. But again, as a worker, you should have the right to band together and fight for rights. I'm open to hearing any sort of argument on this. Again, this is Joel. You're watching Micromobile, and I'll see you very soon. Goodbye for real this time.